So hello all together. My name is Roland Reyer. I'm a technical specialist at Autodesk for the Maya side of things. So for Maya, Motion Builder, Mudbox, even Stingray a little bit. And in today's webinar, I'd like to present you some of the enhancements made in the extension of Maya 2016. Maya 2016 was a big leap forward for me personally because my personal hobby horse is the user interface of applications, and especially in the user interface, we have seen a lot of improvement in 2016 already. And that is not only the look of the application. If you look at the application right now, so when we look at the main window here, so for example, all of the icons that you see in the shelf have been changed. All of the menus have been rearranged. This stuff was made to make the application scalable so that when you have a very high screen resolution, so for example, there are floating 4K monitors around with only 24-inch, which is a super high resolution. So if the application would use that resolution and make very small icons, you could hardly see them. So Maya is now scalable and adapts to a certain screen resolution and to a certain size of the display. That is one of the improvements. Another improvement is in the workflows. So when we look at the modeling workflow, for example, with this satellite here, when I want to work on this top part of the satellite here, let me zoom into this. And I'll open my modeling toolkit here on the right side. You see the modeling toolkit offers you a set of modeling tools that you use all the time, and also a set of other tools for selection, for example, and for transform constraints. These tools here look very simple, but they are carefully chosen to make your whole modeling workflow much faster. So let me select this object here. I'm hitting Control-1, that is a new hotkey in 2016, which allows you to say, okay, whatever I've selected, I want to just see that. And if you hit Control-1 again, you see the rest of the scene again. So you don't have to put everything in layers and hide and show it all the time. Just Control-1 on the selected objects will select them. So when I rotate the object a little bit, you may see that it's tilted. So when I pick it and I use my move tool, for instance, you see that the move tool goes up and down and left and right, but it's not aligned with the object. Even when I use my Shift Control right mouse button menu, and I see that I'm in object space already. So when the object was rotated, the manipulators would go with it. But in this case, all the manipulations, all the rotations were baked in already. So I've lost the orientation of this object. So when I want to pick something and move it along the local axis of this object, I would have to use my pivot tools to set the pivot and orient the pivot to a certain axis. And that has become very easy in 2016. When you hold the D key or when you just press it, you get into the pivot mode. So what I'm doing here is I'm moving the pivot around. So you see the pivot is now on the side of the object. And I can also hover over the object, and you would see that the cursor changes and tells me that it wants to align the pivot to something on the surface. So when I click on this point, for instance, it would align the x-axis of my move tool to the normal of that point. So that is one thing that I can do. I can also hold Shift or Control to modify this thing. So for example, when I hover over an edge, it would say align. When I use the Control key, it would say orient. So it would not move the pivot, it would just orient the pivot along this axis that I'm hovering over. So when I click on that one, you see that the pivot changes a little bit, and this y-axis is now properly aligned to the rest of the object. So I'm hitting the D key again, and now you see when I rotate it, now you see that my move manipulator is aligned along the object's local axis, and that makes it much easier for me to move objects around and to move components around, because that works not only with whole objects but also with components. One important thing to mention is once you are, and I'm hitting D again here, once you are in this pivot mode and you right mouse button, you get this marking menu here with a number of options. For example, you can pin the component pivot. So whatever I have set here for the pivot will be pinned, and when I pick components like faces or so, let me hit D again, then it should stay there. So when I go to components, you see that we have this pre-selection highlighting, maybe not so easy to present in a webinar, but you see when I hover over a face, it will always highlight this red face. This inner part of the object is a separate shell, a separate polygon shell, and I can now select these shells by double-clicking on this object here, and you see that it selects only that, and the pivot is stored, so I can now use my move manipulator and move that pivot around, and or move that shell around and move the part out. So another thing that is important here with this side panel, the modeling toolkit that I've opened, are the selection constraints. You can see that I, for example, can select a certain angle of objects. So when I'm entering something like 35 or so, and I'm hovering over the object, you see that it will select a whole range of facets or highlight a whole range of facets. All these facets are within an angle of 35 degrees. So when I want to select something flat, for instance, like this one here, I can make it with a single click. And if you want to have a larger angle, you can easily change that. So this whole cap of the object can be selected with a single click. Similarly, I can say I want to only have components on the border, for example. So in this case, I'm selecting border, and now only border facets would be selected. And again, with my move tool, with my component pin selected, I can move this down and stretch the object out in its own orientation, in its own local axis of the object. So this is a very important part for me of Maya, to say all my workflows become so fast and so easy that I don't need to concentrate on these complex tasks anymore. It has become so easy that I can do it intuitively and more concentrate on the actual work that I'm doing here with the object. One other thing that is important also has to do with the constraints here. So let's say we want to select only edge loops. So once I'm in edge selection mode, you see when I hover over the object, it wants to select the whole edge loop. One interesting thing is the ability to set an edge slide as a transform constraint. So when I pick this edge loop here, you see that my move tool is now still in this orientation. I can take this edge, and I'm trying to do that slowly so that you can see it update on your screen. You see that it slides only along the neighboring edges. So whatever I do with this thing, I could even, I can slide this down, or maybe I undo it and first set something to my move tool here, Shift Control right mouse button, and I can do a preserve UVs, which means when I move a component like this one here in slide mode, you see that my UVs are not moving. The texture is actually sticking on the surface and not sticking to the edges that are moving around. So I've moved this one edge. Now I'm taking another one and move it around. And look what happens here. When I move it to the side, I can move this sideways, so to say, and make a completely different shape. But it tries to maintain the overall shape of this thing. Imagine if you want to achieve such a shape here and you have to do that manually. That's a pretty hard thing and a lot of work with the single facets. So this one here makes your life a lot easier. So it's worth looking at the modeling toolkit, looking at selection constraints, and also at the transform constraints, and of course the symmetry, which is currently heavy under work, and we are trying to make everything symmetrical so that you can completely work symmetrical. So I leave it here. Let me leave the tool, hit Control-1 to see the rest of the object again. This goes on, so there is a whole bunch of little tricks in the modeling where you can that you can use to select things. So double click, for example, you have seen one example for double clicking when I selected the whole shell, but double clicking with edges, for example, will always give you an edge loop. You can also, there's a trick to select edge rings accordingly with a double click. So double click makes a lot of sense in many places, and it's worth to have a look at that. Okay, so with this one, I'm going to go back to my main panel, and we're going to load another part of the demo here. This character here, I have prepared it to show you the use of the new UV tools. So this character is part of the Payday 2 game, which comes from the Swedish company Starbreeze, and they were so kind and gave us this this model here, or some geometry from the game, and I've removed the material from the body of this character and all texture coordinates. So when I hold my space bar and I go into a perspective and UV editor layout and select this object, you see that I've flattened all the UVs of this character. So I want to show you how you can start to lay out the UVs for this character. So first of all, we're going to do the same trick as before. I'm going to hit Control-1, which is nothing else than the isolate select here. You see Control-1 is the new hotkey for this one. And then I'll start select edges to cut. So in the edge selection mode, I'm going to double click on this one edge here and then shift and add select things. You see how the cursor changes. The cursor has a little plus on it to show now you're going to add to your current selection. And then in the UV editor, I'm going to click on the cut icon or the separate UVs. So I'm click on that, and I've clicked on this icon before, which toggles the display of the texture borders. So now my texture borders, you see it here in the 3D view, are a little bit thicker, and showing you that these are split now. So I've split the model into pieces, but only in the UVs, not in the real world. So to make this faster, I've prepared a quick selection set. You can always create quick selection sets here under the Create menu, Sets, and these quick selection sets will show up here in the Select menu, so that you can, with a single click, you can select a whole bunch of edges, and I can cut them all. And you see now here, these are the edges that were prepared to do the layout. These are the original edges that came from with the asset from Starbreeze, and you see it's far from perfect. So the artist here has made some mistakes. So for example, here in the back of the leg, there are some facets that are split unnecessarily. There's no need for these to be separate, but they are, and there are some more glitches, and we're going to fix some of these glitches in a second. So in my UV view, I'm going to pick all of the UVs with my marking menu. So just click all over it. You can also select the whole object, or it will automatically convert the selection. But in this case, I had selected some of the edges, and that will not work with the unwrap. So the unwrapping is this icon here, unfold selected UVs. You will also find this function here under Unfold in the Polygons menu. I prefer to use the icons. It's much faster. If you right mouse button on an icon, you get the options window, and you can check some of the options here. You see it's an iterative process, so when you increase the iterations later in the construction history, in the channel box, for example, you will get slightly different results. That's important to know about this whole process. So when I apply it to this set of objects here, you see that it unfolds everything. There are no more overlappings anymore. This is a perfect unfold in a single go. If it is possible to unfold the selected polygons, it will unfold them. And as I said, with a few more iterations, it will give you better results, more relaxation. But in this case, it's very good already. So let's use our shaders here. So this shader is showing you back and front of the objects. So for example, when I use this shell here and flip it around, you see that from looking from the back, it's red. Now this one here is seen from the back and this one is seen from the front. Very important to know. Also, when I move these things around and they overlap, you see a darker shader. So that would be the way to check if there are overlappings or any problems with the UVs so far. Okay, so let's undo this move here. And you've seen one thing already. I can move these whole shells around. There's even a tool for that that helps you do that in a single click. Let me increase the view here. And I'm going to do something that I like a lot about Maya. I'm going to make more space on the screen. You see that we have the timeline and the playback range on all the time. And we also have the shelf, for example, on all the time. And I don't need them. So I hold my space bar, and right of the hotbox is a marking menu where you can switch these things on and off. So for example, I don't need the time slider. I don't need the range slider. So I don't need the shelf, which is here to the left. And they are always at the same position. So after a while, you've learned that you just swipe in one direction to get these off. So what I wanted to talk about is this specific tool here, which is the Move UV Shell tool. It allows you with a single click to grab a UV shell and move it around. So I'm not clicking and then grabbing the manipulator. I'm just clicking and dragging in a single move, which is very cool. So we want to have a look at these two shells here. So I'm putting them side by side. They look very symmetrical. So the question is, to save space in the UV coordinate system, maybe I can put them on top of each other and use the mirror texture for the left and the right arm, for instance. So let's take this one here and try to put it on top of the other one. So I did that before. I mirror the whole shell here, and then with the move tool, I can move it around. Whoops. So with the move tool, I can move it around and say, yeah, it looks very good. It looks like I can put it on top of each other manually. Of course, it's never exact, so let's try to be exact. I'm using my pivot tools again. I'm holding the D key. I can do it like that. And release the D key and I'm back in move mode. I hit the D key and now I'm in pivot mode and can position the pivot. When I hold the V key for vertex snapping, it will snap to the next vertex. And you see up here in the status bar, you see that when I hold the V key, it toggles the vertex snapping bar. So I hit the D key again to leave the pivot mode. Now I'm in move mode again. And the same thing, when I hold the V key for vertex snapping, you see the icon goes on, and then I move it close to the other one and it snaps as soon as it is in a certain range. And now we have them on top of each other, and I see that they are really almost 100% symmetrical and lie on top of each other. There's a very slight difference, but it's really, it's not necessary to take care about that. It's good enough for a texture. So some other things that I need to mention here. So for example, I'm taking this one. If I want to see which part it is in the 3D view, I can simply select it from here and then hit the F, the frame selected in the other view, and you see it will zoom in and do that in the other, or show you that object in the other view. So I want to change something. You see this collar is cut here on the side, on the left side of the character, but I want to have the cut in the back of, or in the neck of the character. So what I do right now is I'm going to select edges and simply double click on these edges here and sew them together, and I can use the icon here, the sew selected edges, in the UV editor. Now in the UV editor, let me zoom into this object here and see what happened to it. You see that the two edges here front or on both sides have now joined together. And we can also see that in a view, in a shader called stress view, which shows you how much polygons are stretched. Now these two polygons are stretched a lot, so they appear blue. other ones that are compressed would appear red. So now we have to do something about it. I need to make the cut in the neck of the character. In this case, I'm just selecting one of these edges because I don't know how many small neighboring edges are there. That is really hard to find out. And I'm using a new tool. It's a cut brush. This cut brush allows me to draw over the surface. Actually, I need to make this a little bit smaller. So let me. So here we go. Make this a little bit smaller, so, and I can draw over the surface. Have you seen that? Let me undo it and do it again. So I'm stopping in the middle so that you can see it. It takes a second for it to update. So I'm drawing and I'm stopping here in the middle with my brush, and you see that it cuts it open with my brush. I don't have to select anything. I just draw over the surface and it cuts it automatically, which is extremely cool because all these neighboring, very super small edges that you see here would be a problem for me to find out, do I have everything selected? I would have to zoom in all the way to find it out. And this way you can instantly cut over the whole object and make this process much faster. And there's another brush which is super interesting, which is the Unfold UV brush, which lets you, and I'm stopping here for a moment, which lets you draw over the surface with an unfold brush. That is super cool. Now watch what's happening. I'm stopping in the middle of the process. So I'm clicking and start drawing, and you see what's happening. It's already moving around, and this is all real time. So I'm drawing slowly over the surface and it's unfolding while I'm drawing. That is super cool. Fantastic, because I can limit now my unfold process to a single shell, to a single piece of the geometry. So that is a lot of fun. And we have other brush tools here. So there's a sew together tool. So when I want to join UV edges, I can paint over them and sew them together. There is a grab UV tool. There's a freeze brush, a smear tool, a pinch brush. So all of these green outlined tools here are new brush tools in the UV editor. That's a very cool thing to have. There's actually more to see here in the UV editor, but for the sake of time, I would say we leave it there and move on and have a look at other features in 2016, other interesting features in 2016. But you can see, you know, the UV editor is no longer so that you have to take a separate tool or buy a plugin for Maya to make UVs. This is very good. This allows you to make UVs within minutes. And there are also workflows to make things symmetrical if you really care for symmetry very much. But you know, the layout is already very good. So if you rotate things straight, they will be very much symmetrical already. Good, so let's load another scene here and have a look at another new tool in Maya 2016 that I find really interesting. This geometry here is a high resolution mesh of a character. When I select it, you will see that, wow, that's a lot of polygons, and you don't want to move them you know, individually or using the soft selection tool. That's a lot of stress. So normally you would take such an object into a tool like Mudbox or even ZBrush to model it there and to modify it there. So for the main modeling part, these external tools may be the right choice, but for some things you can actually do things in Maya already using the new sculpting tools. And for that, I need my shelf back. You remember that I switched off my shelf using my marking menu. So here I'm back in my marking menu on the right side of the hotbox, and I switched back on the shelf. And here you find a shelf called sculpting. It's over here. And when I select the object and go into the sculpting tools, I can even double click to instantly open the tool settings, and that allows me to draw over the object. Again, for the sake of the performance, we need to be a little bit slower. So let me try to increase the size of the eyebrow of this character. So I have to undo it once and increase the magnitude so that you can see a little bit more. So I'm brushing over the surface, and maybe you can see when it has updated what happened to the character. So that is one thing that I can do here. An interesting part of that are these fall-offs here, and also the stamp. We will come to that a little bit later. If you right mouse button in that tool, in that sculpting tool, you see this marking menu. So there's a bunch of options already there that you can instantly grab. So there's a mirroring option, for example. I can mirror across the x-axis and do things symmetrically. So if I want to increase both eyebrows of the character, I could do that from here. So let's undo that and take another tool. Here's the grab tool, which is a very interesting one, because with a grab tool, let's try it out on both ears at the same time. So I'm grabbing the ears and simply pulling them long, and you see it's a very smooth fall off. And of course, it's using the fall off here on the left side in the tool settings panel. It's using this fall off to make a smooth transition. So with this one, I could also grab the nose of the character, for example, and pull it longer, or grab the whole thing and give him a completely different look coming from the nose. So that might be interesting. It gets even more interesting. So let's go back into the sculpting tool and use the stamp tool. The stamp is now taking this texture here that is adjusted in the tool settings and is applying that to the surface of the character. Maybe this is a little bit too much, so I'll undo that, and holding the M key, I can adjust the magnitude. You will see a little line there, so I can make some roughness on the surface of the object. So when I zoom in, you see now it has a structure, a texture on the surface, on that high resolution object, of course. So to bake that into normal maps, you can use Maya also. There's a baking texture mechanism in here. But now one of the most interesting tools, when I go back to the grab tool, I can create a blend shape on this object already. So let me switch on the channel box here on the right side, and when I click on this icon here, blend shape, it will create a blend shape. You see that here under inputs, there's now a new blend shape node, and with the next icon, I'm going to open this blend shape editor. Now let me check if you can see that. Yeah. It's this blend shape editor lets me now add new targets to the object. So there's no more duplicating it and keeping them somewhere. You just add the targets directly from here. And now I can say, hey, I want to edit this one target. So I'm making the edit button red. And that means now when I grab the object and do something with the object, I'll switch off the mirroring for the moment. Now when I do something with the object, I'm instantly creating a blend shape. So let's take this one here and open the mouth a little bit, and change the skin of the character to make sure that everything in the face is moving a little bit. So now this one is my blend shape. And it's a pity that we are interactively, or we have such a low performance interactively here, because when I now touch my blend shape slider, you would see it goes back to the normal. It's a blend shape. It's real-time interactive. It lets me play around with the blend shape and check it out. So that's very cool. I'll set this to 0 and just go over to the next blend shape target and work on that one here. So for example, we could go to the other side and grab the corner of the mouth and pull it up a little bit. And here's another trick. When you hold the control key, the circle around the brush becomes white, and this now means I can rotate the grabbed region. So using my grab tool, I can rotate things around. So this is now my blend shape. I don't know what that looks like for you. For me, it's really, I could play with it all day because it has become so easy to play around with blend shapes. So in the last one here, I'm going to go edit and then maybe switch back on the mirroring. I could use my grab tool and just, grab his eyebrows, make him look angry. And, that's already my blend shape. Blend shape on, blend shape off. So it's so easy and fast and interactive to create blend shapes. I can't even remember that I was using the old method anymore because that absolutely doesn't make any sense. Okay, so that was a short look into the sculpting tools in Maya 2016, which allow you to edit not only high resolution meshes, of course, but also low resolution meshes that with the blend shapes becomes very interesting. But some of the high resolution work you can do already in Maya, so you don't need to save your work and go into an external tool. You can do it right in Maya. Okay, another very interesting feature is actually not even one that came with Maya 2016. It's a little bit older, but very little known. Many people don't know how to use that tool. So let me show you how that works. So in this example here,
Hello, Roland, can you hear me? If you can hear me, know that we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now we can hear. Yeah.
For some reason, my headset microphone has given up. Let me check it again. No, my headset microphone is dead. Wait a second.
Okej.
Takes a
Szanowni Państwo, prosimy o chwilę cierpliwości. Roland ma, jak słychać, problemy ze swoim zestawem słuchawkowym.
1, 2. So my headset is working again.
Okay.
For some reason.
Yeah, for about 4 minutes, the audience couldn't hear you.
So let me do the introduction to this one here again. I'm really sorry that this happened. So let me switch on the time slider and at least the time slider here in this example. So what I would like to show with this example here is the great work that our engineers have done creating a new algorithm to evaluate the characters in the scene. Some of our big customers like Disney have complained about their evaluation performance of characters. They not only have a single character like this one here in the scene, they have a whole army of characters in their scene. And of course, they care a lot about the performance because they want to somehow see how the characters are moving and not all the time do something like a play blast. So in this example here, I would like to show you the speed improvements for characters in Maya 2016, for playback in general and for characters in special. So this character here has a complete rig, it is skinned, and it has some animation on it. Down here you see frames per second, the playback rate or the frame rate, and when I hit play, you see the character hardly moving, and part of that is of course that we have a screen recording going on, so it's now saying that it was like 4.5 frames per second. When I stop it from here, you see 4.4 frames per second was the last one that was evaluated. This is not very fast. Some character animators would say, hey, that's very good, because my character has only 1 frame per second, but it's not good. It holds you up in your workspace. So what we've done in 2016 is to add something, and I need my playback range here as well, the range slider. We've added something to the preferences. Here under the animation settings, you will find this new thing here. And it's actually, let me set it so that you can see it. Wait a second. So it's actually, at the moment, it's set like so. This was the time before Maya 2016. The evaluation mode was serial. So all the nodes in the character network were evaluated one by one after another, which takes long. And of course, holds you up. Now we have a parallel evaluation mode, which is new, which is much faster. And it allows you, let me rewind it. So we came from 4.4 frames per second. Let me now play and stop it maybe here. Now you see that we have 7.4 frames. That's almost doubled. I mean, double performance is a great thing. It's fantastic. It doesn't help you much when it's still too slow. I mean, 8 frames is great, but it's still too slow. I can't evaluate the movement of my character with 8 frames. That's simply too slow. So, but it's, it can double the performance of your character already, and our engineers are still working on it to make it even faster in the future. Another thing that makes your character a lot faster is this GPU override. GPU override means that all the deformations of the character are put on the GPU, on your graphics card. I have a laptop here with a K5000 Quadro NVIDIA card, so there is a GPU that can do a lot for me. So we came from 7.4 frames per second, and now when I hit play, look at this. Now we have 21 frames per second. We came from 4.4, let's say 5 frames, then we doubled it almost, and now we have 4 times the performance already, which is pretty good, you know, with only 2 switches, which are actually the parallel mode is already the default. You only have to switch on GPU override if you have a very good graphics card. So 4 times the performance already, and we can even do more. So let me scroll here in the middle. So one thing that the graphics cards don't like at all is these lines here. We need these lines because these are the rig of the character. These are the things that we grab and move him around and do the animation. But the graphics card doesn't like that at all for playback because it means to draw 2 times. First it draws maybe the shaded geometry, which is pretty quick, and then it draws the lines, which is also pretty quick, but both together are 2 draws. So what we can do about these lines is say, here in my layer editor, I've put all of the lines on the Sven rig layer on this one here. And you see there's a new button in the middle between visibility and reference or template. There's a P button, which means that is the playback visibility. So once I'm switching this off, it's still visible, but as soon as I play, you will see, wow, it's hidden. It disappeared while it's playing. You cannot see it. Or maybe I grab, you see I'm grabbing the timeline and the rig is disappeared, and as soon as I release the timeline, the rig comes back. So that is a very cool way of improving the performance. So when I measure that doing the playback, I now have 29 frames per second. So again, we have gained a lot of performance by just switching off the rig, by just switching off these wireframes during playback. So that is very cool already. We can still do a little bit more. Look at what we are displaying with our graphics card. We are doing things like anti-alias even. Very useless. We don't need anti-alias here because, you know, you won't see a difference if you switch it off. Sometimes even maybe switch off the shadows. Also takes some time from the graphics card to display shadows. Now we came from 29 or 30 frames per second, and now let me check here. There are some frames where we even have 37 frames per second. So this one, so let's say we increase the performance to 30 frames per second, which is very good given the fact that we started from 4.4 frames per second. And we just used some of the things that improve the performance, so we didn't even check the character for unnecessary deformations or things like that. So these are the things that are very important for the performance of the character and for the performance of your whole scene. So check it out. Check especially the preferences. Make sure that, you know, under animation you are in parallel mode, and maybe GPU override, depending on your graphics card, GPU override should be on. Good. So these are things that I find very important in Maya 2016 because there's so much potential in these improvements of the user interface, the workflow, and the performance that you can be much faster with Maya 2016. And with that, I would like to go over to the extension features, which actually align with these features here. So in this example here, you see a bunch of robots playing basketball. And the funny thing about the scene here is, and I do that manually so we don't have a playback, at the beginning of the playback, you see the characters even have motion blur. And then while the animation plays, you see that the characters become more and more transparent, and suddenly you see a rendered version with some wireframe in between. And some people ask me, how did you do that? What kind of shader is that? I tell you, it's a very simple trick. At the beginning, you will see an image plane that's simply in front of the whole scene. And during the playback of the whole thing, that image plane becomes transparent. So you see a little bit of the transparent image plane here, and behind that we actually have the wireframe scene. So when I go to another camera here in the center of my hotbox, I can switch to the perspective camera, for example. You will see these are just wireframes. The funny thing is that these wireframe characters have reflections in the underground. So there's a reflection of wireframes, which is also a very funny shader. But again, it's just a trick. My colleague in the States has simply taken all these characters and put some instances in a mirrored position. So these playback characters simply have instances, and that is the reflection you see under the ground. So I'm going to switch to a shaded and lighted scene now, so that we can work on some of the improvements in Maya 2016 extension. So we'll start with a look like this one here, and first have a look at the ground of this play field. So, and something that is new or was new in Maya 2016 already is this one here. Or this new window here. Let me set it up a little bit. This new window is what we call the Look Dev editor. It's actually the Hypershade window, but with a few extras. So the Hypershade window now has its own panels. So here, for example, you see a property editor, which is exactly the same as the attribute editor. So you can close the things on the right side of the screen to gain more space for this Look Dev editor. Here you have a material viewer, which is simply a very fast version of your material in lighted and shaded and reflective mode. In the same spot, and you can do that, you can drop windows on top of each other. In the same spot, we have the material browser. So here in the Windows menu of the Hypershade, you see more windows that you can dock in this view to get the important information that you need to edit your materials. So first of all, we want to work with the floor. The floor has this material here. You see that it's a simple blend material here on the right side. And then there's a texture feeding into it, which is these drawings that you see on the ground and the number, etc. There are actually two textures there. The second one is a wood texture that I want to mix together with my floor drawings. And in the past, it was always a pain to mix two textures together. Many people ended up in Photoshop and using Photoshop to blend things. And now in Maya 2016, you find under the utilities a bunch of new nodes like color composite, color condition, color constant, and so on, or color correct. And you can use these nodes to blend textures together. So for example, I'm using the middle mouse button here to drag and drop a node in my window. And you see this color composite actually composes two colors together, color A and color B. Instead of using, and I can do that of course, I can use my cursor here and draw a little line and connect these nodes manually. Instead of doing that, I can use middle mouse button, drag and drop, and you see me dropping this node directly into the color channel here, bang. And that makes the connection, and I'm taking the other one and drop it into the connection. So you see now we have these two nodes connected. I can still, of course, do it manually and connect my out color with the blend shader, and I'm waiting for you to see the updated window. So here now we have the update. And you see it turns white immediately because it's way too bright. There are there are a bunch of operations that I can use with these two textures. You know them from Photoshop. There's an add, subtract, mix, multiply, etc. So I'm using the screen operation and maybe turn down the factor a little bit. I can now see the wooden texture, but it's I'm not good with it, so I don't like it too much. So what we can do is to drag in another color correct node here. And as I said, I'm using the middle mouse button to drag it in directly so that I know where it's positioned. So now I do it manually. I'm connecting these two nodes together. Bang, I was too slow. It was giving me options. So here I'm connecting these two together and connecting these two together. There's no difference right now. I will now change the gamma of my color correct. Maybe wait for you to update. You see it changes the color. Now the whole thing has become very dark. I'll increase the value of the color correct to see, to reveal some of the wooden texture that we have underneath. Okay, so I'm fine with this wooden texture now. I've changed my shader with these new color nodes. I'll do another trick with the color nodes with this one robot. Let me zoom into this robot over here. You see on the side of the body of the robot, there's a white stripe. And this white stripe, when you look at the shader here, it's pretty obvious, you know, these three textures here. The one is the 32 that we see up here in the body of the character. The next one is a ramp node, which creates this gray strip here on the side. And the third one is some body texture to enhance the ripples on the body of the character. So I want to have this stripe here on the side red as the 32 is. So what I can do here is to, let me zoom in a little bit, to solo the texture of the 32 to show it in my material viewer. This is, I've soloed it just for the picking process, because now I want to go into the red ramp, or into the ramp, and take this gray color, which creates the gray strip, and make it red. So I'm taking the color picker and picking the same red from my 32. So when I unsolo the whole thing, you see, yeah, it's red now, everything is fine. But wait, when we go closer, we see that the red of the 32 is a nice and bright and colorful red, and the red of the stripe on the side of the body is kind of washed out. I don't know what's going on here. We can clarify that by looking at the ramp a little bit. Now let me uncollapse this thing here and solo it so that we can see it here in the material viewer. In the material viewer, we now see the color version of the ramp. I know it because there's a little triangle down here in the node editor next to the channel that is visible in the material viewer when soloed. I can display the alpha channel by double clicking on the alpha channel. Now you see the little triangle is close to the alpha channel. And here in the material viewer, we see a gray alpha channel. So the alpha channel is the problem. The alpha channel is not completely dense. So the washed out red comes from the alpha channel. And there may be ways in the ramp to change that and to improve the alpha of this channel here. But I want to show you a way that makes it really simple. Let me collapse this again. That makes it really simple to stick together your own colors with some color logic. So let me unsolo this one again. So we want to get rid of this washed out red here. I'm going to do a color logic node and place it somewhere here. And you see the color logic node actually compares to color. So the first color would be my ramp. And I say whenever the color is equal to black, so my operation is equal. When the color is equal to black, this Boolean operation, this out Boolean will spit out a true. Okay. And then I'll take a color condition node, which is exactly for this purpose here, and I feed. Let me rearrange that a little bit. So I'll feed the Boolean into the color condition. And I say, this was the comparison, is it black? So if it is a yes, I want the out channel to be black and transparent. And if it's a no, if it's not black, I want it to be white and opaque. right? So what comes out of my color logic node is exactly the alpha channel that I need here. So I'm going to go to my layered shader, and this is the texture that needs to be driven. This is the alpha channel that I need to drive, and I drop my color condition into this alpha channel. And it knows it shouldn't connect the color, it should connect the out alpha. And here you see the color is no longer washed out on the side of the character. It's now bright red, exactly the same red as the 32 on the character. So this one is a pretty cool example of what you can do with the new color nodes in Maya 2016 extension. Because it allows you to skip this workflow to go back to Photoshop and make make correct alpha channels, for example, simply because you cannot do it in the 3D product. This allows you to do a lot directly within Maya and skip the leaving of Maya. So for the next example, I like to change the current frame because I've set myself a bookmark here to look at the leg of this character. Now we talk about the shader of this leg here. The shader of the leg is actually okay. It looks like a plastic material. For the sake of this presentation, I would like to introduce some sort of bumpiness on the surface to give this surface a more rough look. That's easy, so we simply select the material here, go into the bump channel and create maybe a fractal bump on that surface. It's way too strong, but that's not my point here. What my point is, when I solo this fractal, I can see the black and white version on the surface, and then I go into the placement texture and I want to repeat this texture. I want to make it much, much smaller. So a simple way is to repeat the texture, let's say 30 by 30 times. And now look what has happened. I hope you can see that. It repeats the pattern. It doesn't actually, I don't see any gaps between the textures when I zoom in. I don't see where one texture ends and the next one begins, but it has definitely a repeating pattern. So when I zoom out again, you see, oh yeah, I can see repeats. So this is useless. I can't use this fractal texture for what I want to do. So let me grab the whole thing and delete it again. So what I need to do, or what I need to create here, is a new way of a random noise or random texture, and that is the simplex noise node. This is a new node in Maya 2016 extension. Let me show you how this works. Again, I've applied this shader, or I've applied this bump texture. I'll solo it to display the black and white version of it, and then I go to the UV or the 2D placement node and repeat the texture 30 by 30 times. And now you see the same thing. It increases the resolution of the texture, but it does not repeat the texture. You don't see any repetitions. It's a continuous flow of random numbers across the whole space. And when I zoom in, you also see the fantastic resolution of this texture, because it's really, you can go very deep. It has a very high resolution, and it also filters perfectly if you want to render that. So if I unsolo this, here you see the bump version of this, and I can of course also go into the bump node and decrease the bumpiness, maybe even go into the negative a little bit. So here you see the version with the new simplex noise node in the extension of Maya 2016. So this is a new node, fantastic performance and fantastic resolution for all kinds of noises that you may need on your surfaces. Okay, so far so good for the new material nodes in Maya 2016. I have two more features in Maya 2016 that may, or extension of 2016, that may interest you. Actually, we can stay in the scene here. So when I'm looking through my render camera here, you see at the end of the whole animation, there's a lot of blank space. And it's actually, the camera is making a very smooth transition a little bit to the side. And this animation was left there intentionally to give us an opportunity to show a logo of the broadcaster or information about who is playing here in this game. And we want to now create this. And for this, I need my playback or my shelf back. Maybe I can remove the range slider to make a little bit more space here. So what I want to do now is to create a logo. And I have a shelf button here that does that already for me. It creates a new SVG object. SVG means scalable vector graphics, and it's a vector graphics that's turned into a 3D object. If I had Illustrator installed here, I could copy and paste directly. So I could go into Illustrator, copy my whole drawing from the Illustrator window and paste it into Maya, and that would be it already. In this case, I don't have Illustrator, so I'm going to click on the import button here, and it opens an import dialog. And in my project, I have this SVG file format already. On the right side, you see the logo, you see what it looks like, many little pieces here, even different colors, and you will see the different colors will be converted into different shaders on the object so that you can instantly start playing around with the look. So I'm going to scale it up a little bit. So here's my logo, and you see, maybe I'll switch to a 3D view. So this one here is my logo. Now let's play around with it, because in this SVG object lets me play around with the shape of the extrusion and everything a lot without deleting or without redoing things. In the past, it was always so that you had to actually manually build things like this one here. You had to extrude things, bevel things, etc. This one here is one node, and it does everything for you. So for example, the extrusion, I can change the extrusion depth with the settings from here. So simply we make it very flat to show you what I'm doing here, and then undo it. I can have extrusion subdivisions. Now you see a little line here in the middle, so you can make subdivisions to make the whole the whole logo bendable, for example. You can even have these profiles along the extrusion, so you can make a bulge along the extrusion or other things with these profiles here. Down here I have certain bevels, an outer bevel or an inner bevel, that would allow me to create a front bevel, for example. So let me do this one here, front bevel. I show you what it's good for. So maybe with these settings here, you see now we have beveled these letters here, and the good thing is that it will now catch the highlight. So where my mouse cursor is, you will see that it catches the highlight, and that looks a little bit better for the whole object. So all of these things allow you to work on this geometry, maybe extrude distance a little bit smaller, to work on this geometry. One more important thing, so when the camera floats around this logo here, I want to actually make it a little bit more interesting and bend the whole logo. The problem with this bend is this super long polygon here. I cannot bend this thing. The rest of the logo, yes, because it's all small pieces, but this long one here, I cannot bend. So there's a function built into this SVG object already to make things bendable. Here under mesh settings, you will find a deformable mesh. So when I switch this on, so I'm going to zoom into this, to these characters here, to the blue M. When I switch the deformable mesh on, you will see that it cuts the surface in little pieces. It chops the whole object into little pieces and allows me to bend the whole thing. And there's a lot of settings here. You can increase or reduce these settings to make less or more chops or more subdivisions to make it more and more flexible. So this one here is sufficient for me. I would now go select the object and apply a bend. You see, this is a bend deformer here. I don't know if it updates quickly enough. I'll release it here for a moment. You see, I'm bending the whole logo sideways, which is not what I want. So I'm going into my channel box and rotate this bend deformer sideways. Now I'm bending in this direction, which is much cooler. So maybe a little bit less. This is what I want for the moment. So the logo is fine for me, and now I'm going to go for the next thing, which is some sort of text. I want to apply some text and show the names of the teams that are playing here. So I'm going to create also another thing that is new in 2016 extension, which is called 3D type. 3D type lets you create text and modify it after you have created it, which wasn't possible in the past. In the past, we always had to create the text, and that was it so far. So in this case, let me make it smaller, and I'm not going to wait for update here. Move it around, and then you see in my window here on the right side in the attribute editor, I can start typing some new text and it will appear instantly. So I can even animate that text using this tool here, and it still works. So I can have my text aligned to the left, to the center, or to the right. So in this case, I want to have it aligned to the right. Move it over here, make it even smaller. And now, after modifying the whole thing so much, I want to actually bring in the real name of the teams. I have a little editor here where I have the names of the teams already. Sorry, it paused the screen recording. I think it's working again. Check. Yeah, it's working again. So I've copied the names of the teams from my text editor and I paste it into here, and you see immediately it changes the whole text and shows me what it would look like, and I can go to the scale tool, make it even smaller, and use my position tool to position it in the right space. The cool thing about this tool is also the animation possibilities. So here under Animate, it doesn't let me animate. Now under Animate, I can rotate all the characters, for example. So I'm going to rotate them sideways so that you can see. So that's all real time. It's a real animation tool. I can also do that with words. So here's a menu where you can say, I want to rotate the words. So let's rotate the words like this one, for example. And of course, you can also set the pivot for everything. So it's completely customizable. And you see already there's a set keys button here that allows you to set keyframes. So what we want to do here is, and I'm now looking through my render camera. So here is one state of my animation. Let's say from here, for example, I don't want to see my text at all. So I'm using the translate tool to translate it off screen, and I set a keyframe here. And then some frames later, I zero out this translation and set another key. And depending on this delay here, because I have delay switched on, a delay frames option switched on, when I play back, and you can of course not see it, but let me scrub in. You see when I'm scrubbing in, the letters are coming one by one. There are single letters coming in and settling down at their final position while the whole animation plays. And that allows me to, animate the single characters or words or lines, if you like, to come in and do something. They could also come in and rotate, for example. I could add other things like a jiggle when they come in, so that when they settle down at their final position, they would jiggle around. So a simple deformer like a good old jiggle would work on these characters. So let me switch to the free camera to show you what's happening here. So after a few frames, you see the second line is coming in. and then a few more frames, all the characters would settle down. And you can, of course, select this node here and check in the graph editor, for example, to modify the curves for all these animations. So the final thing that I want to do here is you see that that my characters are animated and they are flying in. But what if somebody says, hey, wait a second, your characters are in a straight line, but the logo around it is kind of bent. So what do you do about this bent thing? Can you now take these characters and bend them also? Yes, of course we can do that. So let's go and pick the bend deformer here and go into our deform menu. There's the edit membership tool. This edit membership tool is there exactly for this purpose. You have a deformer and you want to deform some more things or some less things. The edit membership tool shows you with yellow dots what points are part of this deformer already. So all the yellow dots on my logo show that they are bent or part of the bent deformer already. So when I click on my text here, I see purple dots, which are dots that may belong to this deformer, but not yet belong. So now I'm going to shift and open a wireframe. So let me wait for you to see an update. I just draw a wireframe around all these purple dots, and when I release, you see that now this text is also part of the bend deformer. So when I leave the tool and you look a little bit from the right side, you see that the text is also bent. And when the letters fly in, they will fly in a curve because everything happens, this curved state happens outside of this character movement. So these are, I would say, the two drastic news in Maya 2016 extension: the inclusion of 3D type with all these capabilities. When you play around with all these animation tools and the possibilities to set keyframes and use deformers on top of the whole thing, you will find that you can do a lot of motion graphics work with just these simple, relatively simple tools. There's even another way of animating these characters. So let me pick everything and remove that and create a new 3D type object. So, and this time I'm gonna make the font size smaller from within the panel here, so I'm not going to scale the whole thing. I make the geometry a little bit more simple so that we don't have too many subdivisions here. Actually, we don't need any subdivisions at all. I make them a little bit flatter. So this is 3D type, and instead of that, I'm going to use a text like super user, something like this one here. And in my text tool, I want to actually, I'll come back to this later, I want to actually animate these characters using particles. And that's totally possible. So here I can use my particle tool, and I'll click some particles here on the ground, and I need a particle for every character. So SUPER, USER, super user. So I hit enter. Here's my particle object, right? So back to my type object here. I'm now going to change the kerning to 0. So all of my letters will sit on the same space, because that's that beginning position. That is where the particles are going to grab them. Right? So, and now we need to make a thing that is a little bit scary. I need to make a connection between, or actually, I forgot one thing. Here in the type object, I need to switch on animation. Otherwise, I can't even connect these two objects. Now I need to connect them, and in the node editor, let me check on this one here. So in the node editor, I need to find two objects. One is the shell deformer, and the other one is the particle shape. Okay. Actually, on the shell deformer, I need to show all attributes, and then this one here, I don't need to see any. So I'm positioning it there because I know that the attributes that I'm trying to find are here. So here you will find a translate in pp, per particle. So in the text tool, there is already a slot there to feed in per particle translations. And in the particle shape, and I click on it and you will be surprised, there's a whole lot of attributes that I can use and plug into that one. So I'm holding my mouse button on the particle shape for you to see all of these objects here. So the first thing I'm going to grab is the position. So the particle's position will be fed into my position in pp. And then I do the same thing with the rotate. So there's a rotate pp. Can't find it from here. Rotation. No, it doesn't show up from here. So let's do it like this one here. The position is okay already. And you see the super user word has already moved. It has already, you know, or the letters already have taken the shape of the particles. And now in my channel box, or in my outliner, I need to identify the particles because I want to give the particles a little bit of a vortex, and I also want to give the particles a Newton field. This Newton field is now for me to grab the whole thing and move it about because the particles will follow the Newton field, and now I can hit my interactive playback, and you see it's moving around and all these letters are following my particles and even colliding with the underground, right? So I'm sure that is too fast for interactive playback over the web, but you see all these particles that I'm playing around with, you can do anything with the particles, the letters are going to follow. And if you switch on rotation on the particles, there will also be a rotation attribute be available for the particles to connect them with the letters, so you can even rotate the particles according to fields. You know, you can have steam that consists of little letters. You can have bubbles, droplets. Anything that's made of particles can be letters now and can be moved around. And of course, with the goal per particle value, you can also make these letters settle in a certain space to form words, for example, or text of any kind. So this was a long tour. So let's recap what we have seen. At the very beginning of the presentation, we have seen some modeling with the satellite, you know, with my favorite thing here, the new pivot movement tool that allows you to set pivots directly on the surface to snap it on the surface. Then we have looked at the UV workflow, how you can lay out UVs with new tools, make that are much easier. UV brushes even that allow you to sculpt your UVs. Then sculpting in 3D together with the blend shape workflow that allows you to grab the object and create blend shapes right on the fly. We've seen some skeleton workflow where you can now grab the skeleton and position it just over the geometry, and it will snap to the center of the geometry. And finally, of course, here the new performance for Maya 2016, the new character playback performance that makes your character so much faster. Just to remind you, we have started with 4.4 frames and ended with over 30 frames per second of playback speed, which is quite some improvements. And then at the end, we came to the robots. We played around with a new shading nodes in 2016 extension with the Hypershade, the new Hypershade panel that's more like a look dev editor, allows you to, have all the things that you need to create materials, all the things in one place, and lets you use drag and drop to connect nodes together. And of course, the new shading nodes, the color correction nodes, color composite, color logic, and all that stuff helps you build nodes. And then finally, we have seen the new tools for SVG and for 3D type that are a clear move into motion graphics. I'm sure we will see a lot more of that stuff in the future. That will be a very interesting thing. So far from me.